Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends follows the idea that imaginary friends become real sentient beings with their own personality. Only when the children outgrow them, they have nowhere to go. This is where Foster's comes in and offers them a place to live even without the children that imagined them in the first place. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is a fan favorite, as it has won a total of 6 Emmy Awards in its time for various different aspects. Foster's is known for its memorable characters, as they have become a staple of the show. The main character of the show is Mac, an 8-year-old boy who created Bloo, a round blue blob of a person who's Mac's imaginary friend. Bloo lives at Foster's, and Mac visits him basically every day. Other characters that you'll see quite frequently are Wilt, who is a very tall red character who almost looks like a ragdoll. He enjoys playing basketball and is the imaginary friend of Jordan Michael, who obviously alludes to Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player in real life. Wilt is also extremely passive and kind, often resulting in him being overlooked and taken advantage of by the other imaginary friends. How rude. Eduardo, who is a large purple hairy monster with horns and has a Latino accent. He was created by a little girl when she wanted a friend to protect her in her dangerous neighborhood. This is apparent as Eduardo is good at protecting his friends in times of danger. But besides those moments, he's very timid and scared of basically everything. Madam Foster is the creator of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. She's quite old, and she's the grandmother of Frankie. While she has a lot of years, she still has quite a childlike demeanor about her and can be quite mischievous and lighthearted. Frankie is a red-haired teenage girl, and as I said, the granddaughter of Madam Foster. She helps run Foster's and is the main person who keeps everything in order. She easily becomes annoyed by Mr. Herriman. And also, a little-known secret of the show is that Mac has a massive crush on her. Mr. Herriman is a rabbit-like man who resembles the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. He is the imaginary friend of Madam Foster and also helps run Foster's home. He is a stickler for rules and constantly degrades Frankie, even though Frankie almost never actually does anything wrong. Goo is a girl that becomes obsessed with Mac and then will be shown at Foster's quite frequently due to this obsession. They slowly accept her, although it's definitely a rocky start. Last, but certainly not least, is Coco. Coco is a bird, palm tree-like imaginary friend who only speaks and writes her name.
Yes. Yes. Yes, please, with marshmallows.
She lays colorful eggs that can birth various different objects. She is the only imaginary friend that seems to not be able to talk normally, although she is shown being kind and understanding towards others. This first episode in the series is a 3-part special where all the magic begins. The episode starts by introducing Mac and Bloo fighting with his older brother. When Mac's mom has a serious chat with him about how he has outgrown his imaginary friend and needs to get rid of him. Even though Bloo wasn't supposed to be part of the conversation, he ends up listening through the door. Hearing this news saddens Bloo until he sees an ad on TV for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, where good ideas are not forgotten. The episode instantly cuts to them being at the mansion shown in the ad in real life. Mac and Bloo are greeted by Mr. Herriman, who explains he isn't just a butler, but the head of affairs at Foster's. After some mild convincing on Bloo's part, Mr. Herriman agrees to arrange a tour for the boys and calls Frankie down to greet them. While she's able to greet them, someone else calls her to go to work, somewhere else. So Jackie gets none other than Wilt to give the rest of the tour.
Waiting room, sitting room, living room, parlor. Oh, sorry, I had to stop. Is that okay?
After Wilt shows Mac and Bloo where the evil imaginary friends live, they run into Eduardo, who at first really scares Mac, until he realizes he's just a big softie.
Stealthy ones, 2-in-1s, unimaginative ones. Some kids aren't that creative, so they just copy what they see on TV. What are you gonna do?
The boys' hopes are ruined when they learn that if they leave Bloo there, then he will be put up for adoption, just like everybody else who lives there. Mac reluctantly agrees, since he doesn't have another choice. Mr. Herriman doesn't make matters any better, as he tells Bloo that he's seen things like this happen all the time, but the owners never return. That night, Bloo is extremely anxious and sad. The other imaginary friends talk him through it.
Good night, Bloo, and don't worry, Mac's coming back.
And Coco even hatches Bloo an egg with Mac's photo inside of it. I'm sorry, that's really sweet. Meanwhile, Mac is equally as anxious and hopes that Bloo is doing okay. The next morning, much to everyone's dismay, a child shows up and is instantly interested in Bloo. The imaginary friends try their best to keep Bloo out of her reach, but nothing seems to work as the little girl ends up catching him. Thankfully, right in time, and to Mr. Herriman's surprise, Mac showed up right on time to rescue Bloo from the family. Much to Jackie's dismay, she wasn't able to get rid of Duchess, her least favorite imaginary friend.
I will not stand for my good linens to be washed with everyone else's dirty laundry.
And Duchess is equally as disappointed as she feels as though the home is a dump. Mr. Herriman is sure that Mac's love for Bloo will eventually wear out. That is, until Jackie reminds him that Madame Foster never gave him up either. The episode cuts to Mac's evil older brother Terrence, realizing that Mac didn't give up on Bloo. Duchess notices him hiding and asks if he's willing to try and get rid of Bloo with her, presumably still salty that the little girl wanted him instead of her. Terrence happily agrees. The next day, as Mac is rushing to meet Bloo, Terrence stops him and offers to walk him home from school. Not wanting to raise any suspicion on Mac not actually giving up Bloo, he complies and doesn't go visit him that day. Terrence locks Mac in the closet when he takes him home and leaves to visit Foster's for himself, dressing nicely and acting like a good person. When he arrives, Duchess lets one of the evil imaginary friends loose to distract everyone else, so that way Terrence can be alone with him and presumably adopt him with Mr. Herriman's approval. Meanwhile, Mac is desperately trying to get free, using Coco's eggs that he took home with him. He finally figures out how to get out of the closet, but when he arrives at Foster's, it is presumably too late. After conversing with his friends and even convincing Mr. Herriman that Terrence is actually the bad guy, he wonders who could possibly be helping him get rid of Bloo. This is when all the friends realize it must be Duchess, as she was the one causing issues earlier that day, and still hates Bloo. Later that evening, Terrence and Duchess take Bloo to the junkyard, where Duchess plans on feeding Bloo to the extra Measuresaurus, as she's still mad about the family wanting him instead of her. Right before extra Measuresaurus eats him, Mac and the friends show up to the rescue. Mac and friends defeat the monster by getting it confused.
Very well.
And eating his brother and Duchess instead. Although it doesn't actually kill them as it throws them up in the end. After they all get back to Foster's, Mr. Herriman apologizes for his misjudgment and assures that Terrence and Duchess are both being punished for their actions. Then Madame Foster shows up in the flesh. She announces that she has noticed Mac's love for Bloo and will allow Bloo to live at Foster's without ever being put up for adoption again.
Plus, you're so cute, I just want to squeeze you! Squeeze you! Crushing me!
This episode starts with Mr. Herriman being too strict for absolutely no reason, as per usual. After bossing Bloo around, Mr. Herriman lets Bloo know that he's already breaking one rule by not being able to be adopted, and if he breaks another one, then he will be kicked out of Foster's. Bloo, horrified by this, chooses to just stand in the same position for the rest of the day. That is, until Bloo starts ranting to his friends about what's been going on and gets so flustered that he accidentally runs into the bust. The statue, I'm saying bust for the sake of the title, of Madame Foster. They then ask the real Madame Foster to pose as the statue so they don't get in trouble. It fools Mr. Herriman for the moment.
Your granddaughter is working my last nerve. I can hardly believe that you and that slacker are related.
But it won't hold him off forever, so they fix the statue, only for Bloo to knock it over again. Mr. Herriman realizes what happened and threateningly takes Bloo to the office. And while it seems that Bloo is about to get in trouble, Mr. Herriman nonchalantly grabs one of several dozen more statues and hands it to Bloo, saying it happens all the time. In this later episode, Bloo finds a lover. Just kidding.
Do your job, Miss Francis. You're not getting paid to not open doors.
Barry is a cute little imaginary friend that shows up during a soap opera showing, much to Jackie's dismay, but once Jackie sees how cute Barry is, she doesn't mind showing her around Foster's. When Barry sees Bloo for the first time, she instantly falls in love and becomes extremely possessive. She even starts taking photos of Bloo and goes to the length of having her own weird shrine pile of Bloo-themed things.
Hey, you're that girl.
How sweet of you to notice!
The competition gets even worse when Barry realizes that Mac is Bloo's best friend, who will be at Foster's every single day. Barry tries to permanently get rid of him by telling Bloo that Mac is ruining his record-breaking attempts, which is something Bloo really enjoys doing. This successfully runs Mac out of Foster's. Mac isn't gone for long as he's determined to get his friend back. He storms back to Foster's and demands that Barry is actually the one sabotaging. He cuts her rubber band and uses his own instead and wraps her into the world's largest ball of rubber bands. They then push her out of Foster's and she rolls away.
Just important business in my office.
In this later episode, Mac and Bloo realize once again that Foster's is a foster home, not a forever home. Every once in a while, Foster's will hold an event called Adopt a Thought Saturday, which is an all-day event that focuses on getting friends adopted. One of Bloo and Mac's favorite friends is named Jokey, who's a clown, and suddenly they see him going home with a family. When they realize that all the friends could potentially disappear just like Jokey did, they try to shove all of the imaginary friends back into Foster's since they are scared to lose them. Wilt becomes suspicious of this and tells Bloo that he's being selfish by not letting the other friends get a chance for a new home.
This hurts us more than it hurts you.
Yeah, sorry, Wilt.
No, I'm sorry.
But then, horror strikes their hearts as an entire school bus of children shows up. Bloo decides to distract them by doing silly dances and making a lot of noise, which makes all the kids instantly want to play with him and choose him as their friend. Jackie and Mr. Herriman reprimand them, with Wilt putting them in the closet for punishment. In this later, quite rambunctious episode, Bloo decides to throw a wild party, while Frankie and Madam Foster are out of the house, even though she specifically asked for no parties while she was gone. Getting rid of Mr. Herriman was rather easy. Coco just told him that his car was running and he rushed out of Foster's to go and find it. Thus, the party begins. Everything is going smoothly until Bloo starts tempting Mac with sugar in order for him to chill out and enjoy the party. Mac is against the idea of the party happening because he's worried about getting into trouble. Mac does end up getting sugar in his mouth when he runs into an imaginary friend serving the punch that Bloo made sure had way too much sugar in it. This results in an epic malfunction of the entire party, as Mac completely ruins the party. The show then cuts to a scene of Mr. Herriman coming into Foster's with what looks like an imaginary refrigerator friend, and he's scolding them for running away. That is, until Mac runs past him screaming while being completely in the nude. Bloo takes the blame for the party and explains to Mr. Herriman what's been going on. And since Mac ran out of the house in his sugar rush, they decided to chase after him. While they were out, they accidentally ended up at the same red light that Madam Foster and Frankie were at. Frankie came home before them, and when they arrived, they thought they would be reprimanded for the party that occurred directly against what Madam Foster ordered. Instead, Madam Foster explains that the only reason she said no parties is because she loves them and didn't want to be left out of all the fun. The gang ends up partying for the rest of the episode. In this later episode, we learn of Wilt's fatal flaw, that he can't say no. As we've discussed, Walt was the imaginary friend of this universe's Michael Jordan. He loves basketball and was literally created to play. The episode starts off with Wilt being super excited to watch the game and vowing he won't let anything get in his way. That is, until Bloo asks him to get him some chips for the big game, resulting in every single friend at Foster's asking him for favors along the way. He grows more and more frustrated until he confides in Eduardo that he's actually unable to say no to people and it's hindering him from doing things he actually cares about. He promises himself and Eduardo that the next favor someone asks him to do, he will for sure say no. That is, until the favor is Mr. Herriman asking him to help move bags for a friend that just got adopted. He couldn't possibly say no. He does this favor.
Next person who asks me for something is getting a big fat
Excuse me, tall molasses.
And much to his dismay, continues to do even more favors afterwards. He finally gets back to the game with Bloo's chips, only to find that the game had already ended. And he didn't get the chips that Bloo wanted. Bloo dumps them onto the floor and tells Wilt to clean it up. Wilt throws a huge tantrum and finally says no. Wilt, in the end, learned how to say no and stand up for himself. Good job, Wilt.
Great. Now how about getting me my chips?
Sure, you got it, pal. Wait, I mean...
Mac and Bloo's major crush on Frankie is revealed in this episode. It starts off with Frankie kissing Mac on the cheek after he helps her with her paperwork since she wanted to get out early to go to a concert. The kiss sets Mac off and basically falls head over heels for her. And seeing Frankie dressed up for the concert made Bloo grow a crush as well.
She's so awesome.
And hot!
She's so nice.
And hot!
They briefly fight over their love for Frankie, until she comes home the next day and talks about how she met the man of her dreams at the concert. This causes Mac and Bloo to team up and thwart any man that comes near her.
120 minus 119.50 is, hold on, I can do this.
They end up teaming up with Prince Charming, an imaginary friend, to go on a date and pretend like they are a couple so they can eavesdrop/sabotage the date. Dylan, the guy Frankie was actually on a date with, verbally degrades them after Frankie goes to the bathroom. He says horrible things to them, like that nobody would ever date them. that Frankie doesn't even actually like them. She's just trying to be nice. And he also called Bloo an it. Frankie overhears this and beats up Dylan in retaliation. The next day, Frankie is saying she doesn't need any men in her life, which causes Mac and Bloo to continue to hit on her since they aren't technically men yet. Nice one, guys. Nice ones. The first episode of Season 3 shows exactly what Eduardo is capable of. The episode starts off with Eduardo being too scared to retrieve their lost disc from their Whizbee game. Essentially Frisbee, if you couldn't guess. It was stuck in the Extrameasurasaurus cage. To prove that he wasn't a wimp, Eduardo gets mad and runs away. Meanwhile, Terrence is wanting to go to an Extrameasurasaurus fighting ring match, but is not allowed in as he doesn't have an Extrameasurasaurus of his own. That is, until Terrence finds Eduardo running away. In a fit of rage, Eduardo is moving cars and showing off his strength.
Here we go.
Which causes Terrence to start meddling to get him to fight for him. Eduardo ends up being really good at fighting and wins several matches, encouraging Terrence to continue to place him in matches. The gang realizes that Eduardo is missing and they start a search all around town for him. Mac finds out through Terrence that Eduardo has been competing and tells his friends about it, leading them to disguise themselves as an Extrameasurasaurus, and they convince Eduardo to come home. Enraged by this, Terrence locks the gang into the scariest Extrameasurasaurus cage and Eduardo has to rescue them.
Oh, aren't you the cutest little...
Once they put Terrence into the Extrameasurasaurus cage instead, and he gets so scared that he wets his pants. The next day, Bloo somewhat apologizes and the episode ends. In this later episode, Goo is introduced. After Mac falls out of a tree and lands on her, she falls head over heels and decides to follow him to Foster's.
And you're Goo?
Well, actually, it's Goo Goo Gaga. Only my mom calls me that, and only when she's mad, which isn't very often because she doesn't want her.
When she gets to Foster's, she starts inventing imaginary friend after imaginary friend, causing major issues for everybody at Foster's. Nobody liked her and blamed Mac for bringing her here, even though Mac didn't even like her.
She's not my girlfriend.
Oh, okay, Mac. I'll let you hold my hand.
There were so many imaginary friends that overflowing characters had to sleep in a bus because there was no more room in Foster's. All of this tension leads Mac to blow up on Goo. But Goo just wanted to be friends and hang out, and she gets super sad, to which Mac feels bad and apologizes, and explains why she has to stop doing what she's currently doing. Goo realizes her mistakes, and is dedicated to finding good homes for all of the friends that she created. She even shows her family where she's been. Later in Season 3 premieres a 30-minute special Christmas episode that won an Annie Award in 2005 for Best Design in an Animated TV Series. The episode starts with Mac and Bloo seemingly talking to Santa Claus and asking for different presents. That is, until another Santa Claus shows up, and another, and another. Bloo starts asking for a bunch of different presents from all the Santas, until Frankie comes in and explains to the boys that every year more Santas show up because kids get too excited about Christmas and imagine them up. That puts Mac into a funk, because he starts disbelieving that there's a real Santa Claus at all. He tells Bloo of his discovery, but Bloo isn't having it, and decides to figure this mystery out himself.
All right, Mac, I'm going to disprove your theories one by one.
He sends Wilt off to the North Pole to find Santa. He makes Eduardo climb down the chimney to prove that a large man could fall down one. Bloo even takes Mac to the mall to see Santa. It ends up being Coco, though. That night, Mac decides to wish Santa for underwear, a gift that nobody but the real Santa would know to give him. Meanwhile, Bloo has a much more sinister agenda. He decides to dress up like the ghosts from A Christmas Carol in order to try and scare Mr. Herriman into giving them all more gifts than usual.
Bob Marley!
Wait, don't you mean Jacob Marley?
Never mind!
His plan backfires. When Mr. Herriman gets so scared, he ends up canceling Christmas altogether. When Christmas morning finally arrives, Mac doesn't find any underwear at his house, until he goes to Foster's. Wilt came home and claimed that Santa brought him and Eduardo, and also got out of the chimney by saying he felt someone pushing him down. Madam Foster gives Mac a stocking filled with underwear. This makes Mac super happy, as clearly nobody at Foster's would have known to give him that since he'd wished for that at his house. Everyone ends up happy with the gifts they wanted, except for Bloo, who ended up just getting coal.
Just you wait, fat man. One day I shall have my vengeance!
The first episode of Season 4 is quite exciting, and it also references the American TV show The Challenge of Super Friends, which ran for a couple of months way back in 1973. The show was based on the Justice League and featured many of their superheroes. The Foster episode starts with a giant imaginary friend that seems to be quite dangerous attacking the town. Imaginary Man shows up and shows who's boss. Mac thinks this is so cool he decides to join forces with Imaginary Man and be a sidekick. Mac's fondness for Imaginary Man pisses Bloo off, so in retaliation, Bloo teams up with Imaginary Man's arch nemesis, whose name is also, coincidentally, Nemesis. They end up fighting, and Mac realizes that Bloo is the one who's dressed up and helping Nemesis. Nemesis realizes this and assumes that Bloo betrayed her by revealing his identity.
Here comes the best part!
And starts showering him with arrows. They don't actually hurt or do anything. Mac decides to defend him, and Bloo starts retaliating, resulting in an Imaginary Man saying that nobody can mess with his nemesis-sister. Wait, what? They're siblings. Not only does he reveal this to Mac and Bloo, but meanwhile, Mr. Herriman is discussing their creation with the people who created them, who just so happen to be brother and sister. The two are then adopted back into their original family, so that their original creator's children can own them.
That's no way to treat your sister!
Or your brother.
Oh, we're cousins.
And they might actually be able to bond with each other again. This later fun episode in Season 5 is told in the perspective of Bloo's imagination and storytelling, so keep that in mind when you listen to the next part. The episode starts with the Bloo Super Dude, Bloo, who is in search of a magical crystal, Mac's gaming console, who belongs to the awesome creator of everything, Mac. Before the Bloo Super Dude can find the magic crystal, a little boy, Eduardo, mistakes the magic crystal for a magic potato. Bloo then tells an elaborate tale of how everyone and their mom was trying to take the magic crystal, and eventually Lord Snooty, Mr. Herriman, ended up confiscating it.
I wish I'd never find that stupid potato!
Well, none of you should have had it in the first place.
Then yet another character is introduced. A fairy, Frankie, tells them how she's often annoyed by Lord Snooty, and if they help her with her tasks, she will give them a key to get the magic crystal back.
Yeah, your potato, cool shoes, candy businessmen, pet monkeys, rubber sandwiches, paddle balls, my dignity.
When they get to the place where the magic crystal is left, they are bombarded by Lord Snooty's carrots. Yet, they somehow still win against them as well. And after a giant chase scene between the Bloo Super Dude and Lord Snooty ends up getting the magic crystal back. The Queen appears, Madame Foster, and demands that Lord Snooty give her the crystal. She gets so excited by it that she ends up wanting to keep it for herself. The Bloo Super Dude is distraught by what's happening, and he panics and decides to throw the magic potato off of the roof so nobody can have it. Suddenly, the story is interrupted by Frankie walking past and thanking Bloo for doing her tasks, the very tasks, and handing Mac his game console, saying it looked like someone threw it off the roof. Mac realizes that the events from the story all took place in real life and that his console is now broken. Another episode told in the form of Bloo's imagination, this time with him being sick. The tale is of the Bloo Super Dude being hindered by evil villain Frankincense, with her not letting him go to a cool ceremony for the creator of everything. In reality though, Bloo is just sick in bed, and Frankie in real life doesn't want him infecting everyone at the party. The Bloo Super Dude ends up escaping Frankincense and battles a large pink bunny in order to escape the building. He also escapes Wilt by shooting goo at him, an infected loogie. Bloo runs into a talking piece of broccoli, a normal imaginary friend, that gives him certain tasks to do in order to be accepted into the ceremony. It becomes apparent at this time that Bloo is in a dream-like state because he's so sick, which is why the episode conforms to his imagination. Super Dude ends up fighting everybody in his dream, which in reality is him just encountering literally everybody at the celebration in real life, causing all of them to get the risk of infection. The creator of everything shows up and shuns the Bloo Super Dude. Max shows up and is super upset because Bloo crashes the party and makes everybody sick. He even ends up giving Mac an IOU, which is basically saying he'll get him a present eventually, but he doesn't have one right now. Mac then makes Bloo be his servant once he owes him 2 birthday presents. Sadly, in this later episode, Eduardo gets adopted. The imaginary friends, mainly Bloo, try to cope with this loss by finding a replacement for Ed. But when confronted about his feelings, Bloo claims he doesn't miss Eduardo. He's just worried that him being gone is going to change their whole friend group dynamic, which he doesn't want. This particular episode is interesting because the gang is actually able to read how the friends who get adopted feel once they're at their new homes in the form of letters. Meanwhile, there is one friend, Blobby Pants, who actually isn't happy with his new home, and is, throughout the episode, seen trying out different lives. He's seen being around a loud Italian family, a college frat, and even what looks to be a shareholder, a clown at a rodeo, and a chef. While most of the other friends' letters are super happy, some people at Foster's are jealous that their friends are having such a great time without them. It becomes apparent that Bloo too is extremely sad that Eduardo is happy at his new home when he reads the letter that Eduardo sent. Bloo becomes even more distraught, with Eduardo not being there when he receives a scary letter from Eduardo warning of a dangerous situation that he got himself into. While Eduardo was in the woods looking for a real-life unicorn for his child,
I finally picked up the trail of a unicorn. I follow it deep into the woods.
He ended up running into a bunch of hunters. These hunters see Eduardo and begin to pursue, given that he does look like a hefty prize. The entire Foster's building gears up to go save him. Before they head off to rescue him, they receive one last letter, written on a piece of bark. The person Bloo had pretended to be Eduardo decided to read it.
No, don't point that thing at me! I have been shot!
But it makes Bloo so upset he rips off the big purple jacket he's wearing and starts sobbing on the floor. Aw, Bloo does have a heart. All of a sudden, a semi-truck slams into Foster's, carrying all of the imaginary friends that had recently been adopted. The semi was driven by Blobby Pants, as he says he had to escape the outside world and thought it would be a good idea to save everyone else as well. All of the friends are reunited, and he even managed to save Eduardo.
We thought you were shot!
See, I was shot! With a telephoto lens!
Eduardo and Bloo reunite and all is well within the Foster house. The final episode is a sad one, with all the imaginary friends making a large surprise party for Mac since he is presumably moving. The episode starts with Mac not being able to visit Foster's for one day, leaving Bloo to be extremely worried about his absence.
Well, hi there! We're here to see Mr. Herriman about an imaginary friend.
When the situation is explained, Bloo and the friends find out that Mac was too busy packing since his mom decided to move. This is when Wilt mentions to Bloo that they should make his last day special.
I'll kill him, and then he can't move away because he'll be dead. And I'll visit him every day at his grave. Aha!
To which Bloo reluctantly agrees not to murder Mac for leaving him. The next day is filled with Mac enjoying fun things with all of his friends, like playing basketball with Wilt, eating cookies that Madame Foster made, and getting a portrait done of himself and Coco. Meanwhile, Bloo is very bored during all of this, and is only letting it happen because he wants to make Mac's last day as special as possible. This backfires though. When Bloo's patience is finally used up, he asks a bunch of other imaginary friends to leave them alone so that they can finally do something that he actually wants to do. But then, Bloo can't actually decide anything to do until he finally comes up with a super cool idea: jumping sharks with Mac. That is, until Frankie steals Mac away and leads him to a massive surprise party.
All right, here goes.
All of his friends show up and everybody's super happy to be there. Meanwhile, Bloo is still trying to figure out the whole shark situation. Bloo gets so frustrated, he says goodbye forever to Mac.
Dear Mac, goodbye forever, you big jerk!
Which is when Mac finally realizes what is actually happening. Mac explains that he's moving, but just to another apartment in the same complex. So he isn't actually moving away. Bloo becomes confused as to what Mac was meaning when he was saying a tragedy was about to strike then, if it wasn't him moving. To which Mac explains that he's moving into his friend Louise's old apartment, and she's moving somewhere that doesn't allow pets or imaginary friends. Louise owns a really annoying imaginary friend named Cheese that Mac had accidentally dreamed up one night and given to Louise because nobody at Foster's liked him. The episode ends with people screaming in horror as they find that Cheese will be having to come back and live with them. The last episode ends with the intro being played backwards and fading out into a white screen with the words, "Thanks for watching." A fine way to end a fine show. There are 2 movies, also related to Foster's, and they are featured within the show itself at certain points. Goodwilled Hunting is all about Wilt finding his creator and also finding himself in the process. The movie starts with a special Meet the Creator occasion where most of the friends' creators come to visit. We get to meet Eduardo's creator, Nina, and Coco's creators, who are nerdy scientists. All the while, Bloo and Mac are super interested in meeting Wilt's creator, but they never show. Wilt even goes to the length of avoiding everybody's questions about his creator and gets so flustered he ends up running away altogether.
But don't you worry about it.
Don't worry about... What do you mean? Where are you going?
Bloo catches Wilt in the act, which results in Bloo, Eduardo, Mac, Frankie, Nina, and Coco tracking Wilt down. Although, since Wilt stops so many times doing good deeds for others, as per usual, he strays from his original path, and the friends are confused as to the path he's now choosing to take.
Wix. No, it's not. That's a website on how to pick up women.
Meanwhile, Wilt finds himself helping a stuffed animal imaginary friend find its way back home. Wilt explains to the little bear that he knows how it feels to be lost, but that when he himself became lost, it wasn't in the literal sense. After reuniting the little bear with his family, Wilt ends up doing a favor for an old farmer. And while he is helping the farmer, he tells the story of how his creator made him in order to practice basketball. His creator really wanted to beat his older brother and needed a trainer, which is where Wilt came into the picture.
Reckon I can take care of the rest myself.
After Wilt finished helping the farmer lent him his lawnmower since Wilt helped him so much and missed the bus. While Wilt is trudging along in the lawnmower, he sees a bunch of little boys playing basketball, which reminds him of the creator. He has a flashback of teaching him and playing basketball and winning. The second half of the movie begins with Wilt yet again doing more favors because he can't say no to people. This favor results in him accidentally getting arrested for burglary as he thought he was helping people move. He was actually helping them steal. While in prison, he begins telling the tale of his creator. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang is trying desperately to find Wilt, but they aren't having any luck. They end up sitting around and trying to figure out who his creator is instead, hoping maybe it could give them a clue. If not, just to help them understand Wilt better. Nina goes on to explain that if they think of Wilt's characteristics as a person, they should be able to figure out the type of dynamic that the child that created him had. This leads Mac to realize who it is, and the whole gang goes off on another chase to find Wilt's creator. When Wilt gets out of jail, he runs into his old friend Stats, a walking, talking stat board. Like the one you see at basketball games. Stat asks what Wilt is doing there, in which he says he's there to meet Larry, who is seemingly his arch-nemesis. They start having an epic basketball match. The story goes to a flashback, when Wilt and his creator had an epic basketball game with his creator's older brother and his large basketball-shaped imaginary friend, Larry. The game ended with Wilt saving his creator from getting hurt, but in doing so, ultimately resulted in them losing the game. In the process of saving his creator from harm, he ended up losing his eye and his arm, which is why Wilt is shaped the way he is now. Wilt, not being successful in doing the one thing his creator created him to do, he chooses to run away. Right as Wilt is about to sacrifice his body for the win of his one-on-one match, he gets pulled away by none other than his original creator, who is then revealed to be Jordan, Foster's version of Michael Jordan.
Southern Gogo's nerds found out he was shooting a commercial in Japan, so we flew out there. But when we got there, you weren't there, so we were like, oh no, and Jordan Michaels was all, you mean Wilt is looking for me? And we were all, yeah.
It's revealed that his friends are the ones who found Jordan and brought him to Wilt. After this reunion, Wilt and Jordan then have a super sincere heart-to-heart, and Jordan apologizes for making Wilt feel the way that he did. He explains that he looked all around for Wilt but couldn't find him. He then offers Wilt a life of fame and luxury, to which Wilt apologizes, but refuses, as he feels he's more fit for some other little kid that actually needs him. Last side note before moving on, Goodwilled Hunting alludes to the American film Goodwilled Hunting, which features Matt Damon and Stellan Skarsgård. Goodwilled Hunting mimics Good Will Hunting in the sense that in both movies, one of the characters has a bunch of hidden potential that could lead them to great success. And much like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, who was just a janitor even though he had an enormous IQ, Wilt is just an imaginary friend at Foster's who has Michael Jordan-level basketball skills. He just chooses to stay where he's at for the good of the people. This movie focuses on Frankie and her disgust for Mr. Herriman, always bossing her around. As we all know, Frankie takes care of literally everything in the house and barely ever gets a break. It's been seen, even the episodes that I've covered, that she sometimes has to get help from her friends or Mac in order to finish her chores in time for her to do any fun outside activities, like the concert I mentioned earlier.
I finally have time to...
At the start of this episode, an interesting box arrives at Foster's. A box that says not to open it because imaginary friends live inside. I don't think Frankie was necessarily going to open the box, even though she really wanted to, but since she got a warning from Mr. Herriman not to open it, she definitely wanted to a lot more. When taking the box up to the attic of Foster's, her imagination, get it? Ha, got the best of her, and she opened the box, disregarding everybody's warnings not to. When she opens up the box, nothing is there, and Frankie falls into a whole new world. Shortly after falling, Frankie hears a faraway voice belonging to the imaginary friend that was said to be in the box. They converse, and the friend tells Frankie that there are even more beautiful parts of the box to see. Frankie follows the animals and is put into a teenage girl's paradise, literally, and gets pampered while she gossips with her friend. After a while, Frankie leaves and is told she can come back anytime. For the next several days, Frankie is shown doing boring, mundane day-to-day tasks and then getting absolutely pampered by the imaginary friend in the box. That is, until the friend doesn't let Frankie leave. Once Frankie doesn't return, the friends become worried about her. Well, Mr. Herriman just threatens her with a pink slip and leaves her be in the box. The friends tickle the box and fall in as well when it ends up opening. They wander into a town, only to find that none of the people respond to them. They eventually start getting chased and warned not to go after the person that they're trying to find. At first, they're chased by police officers. A Robin Hood-like character then appears, telling them that they will be the ones to actually rescue Frankie, and all of them should just go back to their own world in the meantime. The Robin Hood then takes them to a bunch of places that do not contain Frankie, and tries to hinder them and trap them along the way without them realizing that he's actually against them.
You're fired!
Just a teaspoon of cinnamon!
You're fired!
The friends become separated from Robin when they escape the crevasse that they'd fallen into. They eventually wander to the little puppy's house that Frankie had originally met at the beginning of the episode. Mac becomes suspicious when he hears the puppy yell out Robin's catchphrase, but doesn't say anything. Although Mac does pretend to eat the cookies that the puppy offered to them instead of actually eating them, as he can't have any sugar. It becomes apparent that Puppy has malicious intentions when all of his friends become incredibly sleepy.
God, they make my tongue numb. My hand too.
There was sleep powder on the cookies. Mac is able to tie the puppy up with the help of Eduardo, who presumably woke up. The friends question the puppy, for which the puppy makes his escape by transporting its eyes to a different object. It is then realized that the imaginary friend, World, is able to move from any object without a face to another and control it. In order to capture it, Mac captures it while it's taking over an apple, and since Mac already has a face on it, it can't move to any other object. Mac chooses to leave the World out in the middle of the desert into a pile of quicksand, since he won't be able to move from that spot. But wait, World ends up luring a wild horse to him and is able to morph into the horse instead. Meanwhile, the friends finally find Frankie, only to find that Frankie doesn't want to leave.
You're right. I don't really have to go, do I?
She's actually offended that they want her back so much, considering all she would ever do for them was serve. She doesn't understand that they miss her for her, not just for her job. World hears what happens and gasses the friends. When they wake up, they think they're at the regular Foster's attic until they realize that they're actually still stuck in the imaginary world in a miniature version of Foster's. Frankie becomes suspicious when she hears voices coming from the miniature Foster's and figures out what's happening once a letter hits her in the face, warning her of what's happening. Frankie demands that World make them larger. The World apologizes to the friends, and they all make up. That is, until Mr. Herriman shows up and punishes the World for all that he's done, saying that he's taking Frankie home and she will not return. The World becomes overwhelmed and starts having a panic attack, resulting in him having a whole meltdown. World's meltdown causes the entire imaginary world to collapse and disappear into a white nothingness. The friends eventually find the entrance and start climbing up, but ultimately fail, as World causes a huge gust of wind to knock them all down. World attacks them all, and even ends up devouring Frankie. All of the friends make it back to their real world after riding on World's back and jumping back into the entrance. Frankie ends up convincing them all to release World, since that's all that World actually wants. They release him, and all is well within the world. The real world.